Public Works and Natural Resources, which is chaired by Councilmember Lillquist. So I will turn it over to him.
Thank you, Hannah. Joining me on the Public Works and Natural Resources Committee are Councilmembers Knudsen and Anderson, and we have 4 items before us today. The first item is an ordinance for the James Street Preferred Arterial Standard. This is a returning item. Public Works Department recommends approval of a non-traditional arterial street standard for James Street in the King Mountain neighborhood, as documented in the 2019 James Street Multimodal Feasibility Study. The proposed alternative for James Street includes construction of a separated 10 to 12 foot wide paved multi-use pathway on the west side of James Street and limited sidewalks on the east side. The separated path is in lieu of traditional sidewalks and bike lanes on each side of the roadway. Developers would be given the option also of contributing towards the city design and construction of the alternative standard instead of making the traditional street improvements at the time of development, which is what's already required. The proposed ordinance is included before us for further council discussion. As I said, this is a returning item. We had a public hearing on this, I think on May 10th. Mr. Schulhauser, is there any further comments?
Just wanted to bring this forward. Normally we would have a ordinance like this on consent calendar, but I believe there was some confusion last time at the public hearing. So we just wanted to clear up any of that confusion. I had a couple points. I'm going to share my screen just to talk about this really quickly. Hopefully you can all see the layout there of the corridor. And so basically, I think there was some confusion last time about the multi-use pathway replacing sidewalks, and that is not the case. On the east side, we will end up having sidewalks because we need to get people across James Street in that corridor. And so there will basically be 3 sidewalk areas, one down here in the Gilbert Drive area, which will be a curb gutter and sidewalk to get people down to the new signal at Orchard, get them across. There will be some sidewalks in front of James Street Estates to get them to McLeod Road, which will have a proposed RFB, or right now is proposed for an RFB. And then there will be sidewalks up south of Bakerview, between Bakerview and Telegraph, to get people to either intersection up there.
Chad, can you explain what RFB means?
I'm sorry, rectangular flashing beacon, an enhanced crosswalk, which is proposed down here. I also do want to be clear that this is all preliminary. Design has not started on this to any extent. This is where we would propose in the design of these facilities to put sidewalks to make sure pedestrians could get across the James Street corridor onto the multi-use pathway. The other confusion, I believe, that arose is that this is not an assessment. This is not an LID. No one is required to buy into this. It would only be triggered if you were required by your development to construct frontage improvements along your parcel. If you were developing a short plat, there are no frontage improvements required with that. So you would not be buying into this alternative arterial standard. It would only be if your development triggered frontage improvements, at which point you would be given the option to buy in to this program in these sections of James Street. So just wanted to provide some clarity on that, and as the council was getting ready to vote. And I'm happy to answer any other questions you may have.
Thank you, Chad. Committee members? Lisa, go ahead.
Thank you. And I apologize for not asking this earlier, but it came up later. So at some point, we will be making these improvements because it's much needed. So as we're looking at crosswalks and roundabouts and other things, if development hasn't come in to the point that enough funds have been generated to buy into doing this, and the city at some point is able to either through grants or TIP or something be able to come in and do the work, then does future investment or future buy-in to something like this then pay back a fund? Or is it just that they benefit that they did the development much later? I'm just kind of wondering structurally how this works, because somebody might pay into it, do their development. We're not ready to do the work because there's not enough funding. So does that money sit somewhere until it's time? Just
Yes. Those are very good questions. And the intent of you buying, quote, buying into the process, we will be using those funds largely to pay for the design work necessary to move forward with the projects as they move forward. If we're successful in securing grants for the project, we would not be able to retroactively, after the fact, assess property owners. That would be done through an LID, this is not. So if a project were to come forward and if it were subject to the requirements to do street improvements, they would have the option, in lieu of doing those improvements, of paying the city what's described in the ordinance, in lieu of doing those physical improvements, which would not meet the city's preferred standard for James Street. So, but if the city were to move forward and get the project built before somebody to develop, then they would benefit from the public investment along that street, which is needed not only for the developments along James Street, but for the community as a whole. But this is a pretty clear distinction that this is not an assessment. This is not a local improvement district. So this becomes voluntary or optional, but would not be either prospective or retroactive in either case. One other point to just clarify, if I might, I've got the microphone here. The alternative standard, in essence, removes the bike lanes from the travel portion of the roadway and places them on the west side. So to Chad's point, there are still sidewalks on the east side. The multi-use pathway on the west side allows us to remove bicycles from the major corridor on James Street where the cars are at and separate them. That does two things for us. It saves us some money in terms of the cost of building the wider roadway, but it also meets another purpose of separating bicyclists from that heavy arterial.
So, Mr. Johnson, you mentioned that it, quote unquote, saves us money, that this alternative is cheaper. I think it was by several $1 million, like, I don't know, $8 million or $7 million cheaper. And that savings would go to both the city and also to a private developer if they needed to develop their frontage and or wanted to buy into the system.
That's the intent, yes.
Gene?
I'll move approval.
Okay, we have a motion before us to recommend approval of the alternative street standard for James Street. Councilmember Anderson?
Thank you. I'm also going to support this, but I did have one more question, just understanding how this is all going to work. We do definitely need to have these improvements made. I spend time traveling out that way, and it's so lacking in amenities. But if we do have a large development coming in and they opt into this, has there been discussions on a trigger point where we're really going to have to put these improvements in? My concern is that if there's a sufficient lag between the development and the improvements, we're just going to create worsening situations for our alternative multimodal transportation. So I'm kind of wondering if there's a vision for the timeline of this work happening.
That's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer as to what the future may hold. However, we have been very consistent and very diligent as a city, as a council, and the community in identifying projects and using the 6-year TIP process, which is on for public hearing tonight, as a mechanism to prioritize and schedule and fund improvements of this magnitude. And improvements along James Street are not simply just this alternative standard. Recall that we're also making improvements along Orchard Street, funding for the Bakerview roundabout. We've made substantial commitments to this corridor over the last 10 years and will continue to do so. We do not have a timeline or a date as to when we would go to construction. In terms of the dollars that would be contributed voluntarily by development applications, those dollars would be spent on design work, which would be earlier in the process. The bigger challenge is finding the money for the construction in the longer term, but we would not run a risk of having to pay the money back to the developers because we'll spend those funds on the design in the early days. What that does also let us do is it uses that leverage of the private contributions against grants. So then that gives us more competitive. We're more competitive on those grant applications at the state level if we have the private contributions in addition to the city funds and what other sources we might come into. So don't have a timeline as to when construction would be, but this is a reasonable approach to incrementally get to that point along James Street.
Mr. Johnson, isn't this project part of the TIP project number 16?
Chad might know that specific number, but yes, it is part of the tip.
Yeah, and in that we have a placeholder stuck at 2017, I think, but I think that is just a placeholder rather than a commitment date.
Correct.
I do want to also add just one more thing is that when any development comes in for review, safety is one of our utmost concerns. So if, for instance, a development were to come in and be proposed in the middle of that vertical curve along James Street corridor, we would be in the unfortunate position of having to deny that at this point in time because we can't allow access to an arterial corridor which has safety issues if we're going to be adding more volume out there.
Thank you. That was a little bit of my concern, so thanks for addressing that.
Any further discussion? Well, if you've been here a while, you know that I have expressed concern about the idea of putting bike lanes along arterials. I consider it an unsafe compromise and often necessary location, but anytime we can move the bike lane away from the high-speed traffic lane is a good thing in my mind. And so this is an example of that. I think it'll lead to a safer outcome. If there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor of recommending approval of the alternative street standard signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that'll come forth unanimous recommendation this evening. Oh, sorry, I switched to the tip in my document. Give me a moment to find my way. The next item, I believe, is to authorize a request to authorize the mayor to enter into an interagency agreement between the city and the Department of Ecology for National Coastal Wetlands Conservation Grant funding for the Little Squalicum Creek Estuary project. Whatcom State Department of Ecology has awarded the National Coastal Wetlands Conservation Grant to the city to be used for the construction of the Little Squalicum Estuary Restoration Project in Little Squalicum Creek Park. The Little Squalicum Estuary Restoration Project will help address the needs for estuarine habitat in Bellingham Bay by restoring a total of almost 5 acres of coastal wetland habitat, including 2.4 acres of the estuary itself, and also removing a fish passage barrier that you can see down there at the mouth of Little Squalicum Creek. According to this note I'm reading, this grant is one of 5 anticipated state and federal grants to complete full project funding. I note that this is almost $1 million towards that project. I'm sorry, who's the staff member? Mr. Johnson, can you tell us a little bit more about the other sources of funding and the timeline?
I will be happy to introduce Renee LaCroix, who knows all.
Hi, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to just update council on this project. It's an exciting project. It's been in the works for quite a while. The planning for this project started back in 2009 as part of the Parks Master Plan, and it was adopted into the master plan. And as you already said, it's going to create a 2.4 acre estuary at the mouth of Little Squalicum Creek. And that's going to, the intent of that is to improve juvenile salmon habitat for the juvenile Chinook that are coming out of the Nooksack River. It'll provide estuary for them to rear and grow. And then we're also going to create about 2.5 acres of beach nourishment to replace some sediment that's been lost along the beach, and that'll increase forage fish habitat as well. So this is the first of 5 grants that we anticipate getting. It is close to $1 million, and the total funding we hope to bring in for the project as a whole is $2.9 million. If everything goes well, we hope to go to construction in 2022. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Committee members? Well, looking for a motion then. Lisa?
Dean beat me to it, move approval. But I was just going to make a comment. I'm so happy to see this come forward. And it's just a testament to some of the great work our public works and especially in our environmental mitigation and the partnership with ecology. So I've been watching the steps taken to get to this point for a while, working with parks, and just kudos to staff for bringing this together and moving us a little bit forward environmentally in this area. So thank you for great work, and looking forward to when that estuary starts having that salt water flowing in, so that we can see what our shoreline should be looking like. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And we have a great team of people working on this. Annalise Burns and her staff are the real muscle behind this.
Well, then thank you, Annalise, to you and your staff. I agree. I think Little Squalicum Creek Park has really grown and become a wonderful location over the last several years. I have one small question, then I'm going to go ahead and call the vote and vote in favor of it myself. When we put in the estuary, I assume it will be kind of closed off to the public, at least for a time period after it's first in place. But what will future access be like? I would kind of assume that access will be limited. We want to, not damage the sensitive environment. But how will we manage that? Will there be like an overlook or something so people can get close but not too close? How do we anticipate handling that?
No, it's a good question. So there currently is a trail that leads basically from the technical college down to the beach, and that trail will remain. It will be relocated on the edge of the estuary, and then there'll be a bridge over the new estuary outlet. So the existing outlet will be moved eastward a bit, and there'll be a new bridge over that. So there'll be amenities that will help keep people on the trails and on the bridges, and then we'll fence it as needed.
Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, I'll also bring that forth unanimous recommendation. Thank you so much for that good work. And moving forward, this is a long agreement. Sorry, I'm scrolling through the document. I believe the next one is on Post Point. So this has to do with a bid award for the Post Point sewage treatment plant that has to do with replacing the chlorine gas. Post Point chlorine gas replacement.
Councilmember Lillquist?
I believe.
Yes.
I don't know if it matters how you take the order, but the authorization of the joint resolution to develop public radio systems first.
I'm sorry.
Page 126.
See, this is the downside of. Okay, excuse me, everyone. The third item is actually an agenda item to authorize a joint resolution to develop a countywide public safety radio system. Public agencies across Whatcom County use a variety of UHF, VHF, and 800 megahertz radio systems operated by both public agencies and under contract with private operators. The systems are maintained through a combination of public agencies and private contractors, and radio communications from 911 centers are used daily by first responders. In addition, police, fire, EMS, the radio systems also used daily by public works agencies, by the Whatcom Transportation Authority, by school districts, and others. A redundant and reliable system is critical to ensure the safety of the public and the personnel in public service. Staff here from the city of Bellingham and Whatcom County and Whatcom Transportation Authority continue to work to improve this system. What we have before us today is a joint resolution which reinforces the policy commitments of the city, Whatcom County, and WTA, and directs further partnership to improve countywide public radio systems. Before I open up for discussion, I will note that Council members Huffman and myself serve on the WTA board. That is, we have fiduciary responsibility both as city council members and as county council members, and we're consulting with legal staff with regard to the appropriateness of any further actions and what we should do to stay on the straight and narrow in terms of that potential conflict of interest. Right now, there's no seen problem with voting on the resolution, which makes no legal or financial commitments at this stage. So I would open discussion. Mr. Johnson, are you going to begin?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lillquist. So this is a project that has been probably nearly 20 years in the development, and it continues to be worked on. The Whatcom County, the city of Bellingham, and WTA are separately connected in our radio communications. And by and large, we have a shared interest in making sure that that system works correctly. One of the challenges we're facing is that the capacity of the system that's currently being used, which is the UHF, VHF band, is not currently meeting the needs of our public safety agencies across the county. And critical as part of that is that the interagency communications in the event of emergency are difficult because of the disparate systems that are used by those various agencies. So several years ago, well, many years ago, identified really after 9/11, the need to have interagency radio communications became highlighted, and even more so highlighted following the Cascadia Rising earthquake drill that was run by the state and locally by the Emergency Management Office. Compounded here in Whatcom County is our proximity to the border. So you may be aware that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, controls radio spectrums and limits that based on the number of licenses. Within Whatcom County, we then have to also be aware of the influence of the Canadian border. And so we're somewhat limited in our capacity and our ability to get things done with that. The need is to move and migrate the public safety systems. And when I say public safety, that has two connotations. One is the users, being police, fire, sheriff, public works, school districts to some extent, the WTA, but also the redundancy and reliability built into that system. We want to make sure that that system works in the event that other systems fail. So it's a very highly redundant, reliable system. Currently, the system that we would like to migrate to was referred to as the 800 megahertz radio system, and the licenses for that system are owned by the city of Bellingham and currently a private provider. Josh Nylander with WTA is on the call here today, but WTA is moving forward with acquiring the licenses from that private provider so that all of the licenses necessary to run a countywide public safety radio system will be held in public ownership. So the purpose of this, and while this is also going on, the city is continuing to harden our infrastructure that serves the Whatcom Dispatch Center, which serves almost all of Whatcom County, the Prospect dispatchers, which serve fire services for nearly all of Whatcom County. So our existing fiber network, radio towers, communication systems, and our staffing are used to support a substantial portion of the county. The county is moving forward with helping create some redundancy and reliability in the transmission between some of the towers. There's a graphic to that in the packet as well. In combination with WTA's acquisition of some of the licenses, enables the city, the county, and WTA to partner together to create this countywide public safety radio system. So this resolution that you have before you today is to affirm a commitment by all three of the policy boards, and Whatcom County approved it last Tuesday. WTA approved it last Thursday, I believe. I'm losing my dates. And so the city of Bellingham becomes the third of the three to develop this resolution. The next step would be for the staff, as is outlined in the resolution for staff. That's largely Bellingham, WTA, and Whatcom County staff to coordinate with some of our fellow public agencies in smaller cities to identify a structure and an agreement which would allow the system to be operated, maintained, and used by public safety operators throughout the county to benefit all of us together. So this is just one step in the process. The resolution directs staff at all three agencies to continue to work together and develop that agreement and that operating protocol to develop that public safety radio system that's redundant and reliable and useful and extends coverage to areas that currently aren't covered, but retains all of that in the public ownership and public realm. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? You don't need to, Mr. Nylander, but is there anything you would like to add about WTA and its involvement in this project?
I just think we're excited to be participating with the city and the county on this. Look forward to the eventual interlocal agreement.
Okay.
Eric, could you, I've heard some people express some confusion about what redundancy means. Can you define that?
It's a great question. So we have, engineers often use the term reliable and redundant. And redundant means that if there's, in simple terms, if there's one, that means there's a backup. So if reliable means two, then redundant means three. So that means that at any point in time, if the system breaks down, there's another way to get to that point. And if I might, let me do a quick screen share here, and I might be able to demonstrate that a little more clearly. So here on the screen shows a graphic of Whatcom County with some red lines, green lines, and a couple of towers. Reliable means that tower is going to work 24/7, and that might mean a backup generator to make sure that the power is functional at that particular site. Redundant would mean that if any one of these individual radio tower sites were to go down, that there's another way to get that system in place. So as we see there's this, what they call a ring, or sometimes referred to as a backbone of the radio system. And from this ring and these towers that are located on the high points throughout the county, we can get radio coverage throughout the entire county. So a redundant, reliable system would mean that any point in time, if any one or potentially two of these sites goes down, that we still have the capacity and reliability redundancy to make sure that the coverage is still there. So these connections are made through a combination of fiber optic cabling, mostly in the city. This is mostly done with fiber optics, and then microwave repeaters and transmitters that are placed on towers to connect the system together. So when I talk about the term reliability, that means if it takes one to do something, then we put two in. If it takes two to do something, we put three in. So that at any point in time, it is usable by the operators. One of the goals that John Gargett, Josh, and I have talked about is that we don't want a user, a paramedic, a fire operator, sheriff, or a bus driver to have to spend their days worrying, is the radio going to work? Are they out someplace, and is it going to work today? We just want it to work and be there regardless of what happens. We want it to function like your utilities, where you can expect to turn the tap on, the tap will run. We want the radio system to work regardless of what's happening in the world. So if the cell system goes down, the radio system is going to work. If the phone system goes down, the radio system is going to work. So that redundancy, reliability gets to the assurance that it will work regardless of what is happening around us.
Thank you, Eric. Lisa?
Thank you. And I just wanted to verify that once this work goes forward and an agreement is made on who's going to be maintaining it and cost and everything, that's going to come back to council for final approval. I mean, I would assume so, but just wanted to make sure that's the plan. I see head nods. And the other thing, not wanting to second guess, but I do have experience with utilizing radios in a previous profession when I worked for the Forest Service, and know how there are drop zones. And I'm looking at the one location in Sumas and thinking of areas like Van Zandt and, up by South Fork. And just kind of wondering if that one tower is sufficient for coverage in some of those outlying areas like Deming, if we're really looking at that point of redundancy. So just kind of curious that that work has been done and researched to make sure one tower located out in Sumas would be sufficient in order to really take care of North County.
There is a lot more work to do on this system. So the two questions there. First of all, is the interlocal does need to come back to all three boards and would come back and be extended to any other agency who wants to buy into the system or participate in the process. So, but all interlocals do need approval by the various elected policy boards to make those decisions. And the figure that is in the packet shows the core backbone of the system. There will be areas that we will find over time that will need to have some additional coverage to extend out to some of those smaller areas. The testing that we have done so far, that this 800 system has the capacity to be connected in with other agencies to get that coverage that we need in critical areas. One of the key areas, and this isn't really to the city of Bellingham, but Whatcom County, recall, their sheriff's office covers portions that are sometimes thought of Skagit County, Baker Lake, New Halem. That's even though you got to go through Skagit County to get there, it's tough to get radio coverage using the existing system. This system allows us to connect to other regional systems, other agency systems to be able to get that coverage where we can. But there is still more work to do in terms of building the system and network out. I'm sure that will continue over many years to come. As I mentioned earlier, this is a long time coming. This first step in the process is to identify by this statement of commitment that the three agencies are going to work and resolve and get that system put into place.
Mr. Nylander, did you want to say something too? I see you unmuted.
Well, I can, if Eric. So I was just going to say that WTA has been using a good chunk of this 800 system for 5 years, including out in the Van Zandt area and East County. So we do know where there are some issues, and we do know where it works well. So we certainly look forward to keep working with our partners to improve in those areas where we have challenges. But I think that's the great thing is that not only has big parts of this system been in use by WTA throughout the whole county, the city of Bellingham is also using the 800 megahertz system in their day-to-day operations and public works and stuff like that. So we're building on a proven base, and so that'll be and we'll be able to expand upon that as well.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Eric, sorry I cut you off. I thought maybe you were ending your statements. Any further discussion?
Move approval.
Okay, we have a motion to approve I think it's the resolution for the interagency agreement. As I see it, there's like a really simple question and a hard question. The simple question is, shall we acquire this 800 megahertz band and use it for a countywide system? Yes, obviously. And the harder question is, how do we apportion costs and operations, all those issues, and that's what needs to be worked out, in my opinion. Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, I'll bring that forth, unanimous recommendation tonight. We'll go on to the last item. This one now is the bid award for the Post Point chlorine gas replacement project. The Post Point chlorine gas replacement project involves installation of a new on-site sodium hypochlorite system that will replace the existing chlorine gas system at the City of Bellingham's resource recovery plant, the sewer plant. Elimination of the chlorine gas system reduces the risk of exposure from the chlorine gas, which is very toxic for both employees and the public. Work includes layout and design activities, furnishing of the equipment, construction of ancillary improvements, and startup and testing of the new system. This is highly technical work, and the city received 4 bids, which were publicly opened on March 11th of this year. And Hawk Mechanical of Monroe, Washington, was the responsible bidder who submitted the lowest responsive bid of $2,795,644, including all sales tax. The engineer's estimate was a bit lower at $2.4 million. Mr. Mike Olinger is here. Do you want to begin the discussion, Mike?
Just before Mike gets started, not to jump in there, but just one comment about the engineer's estimate. So this is a project that we developed in 2019, intending to send it out to bid in 2020. We did not send it out in 2020 due to making sure that our operators at Post Point weren't unnecessarily exposed to COVID from a contractor. So the engineer's estimate was dated from 2019, adjusting that for inflation for 2021, and we're in that $2.8 million price range. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike to walk us through the benefits of this project.
Thank you, Eric. Good morning, Council. I'm going to share my screen here. So as Eric said, the Post Point Resource Recovery Plant chlorine system replacement planning efforts really began in around 2010. We started design in 2018 and intended for construction to take place in 2020, but due to COVID, we kind of put that on pause, put the project on a shelf, and now we're ready to get it back in place. So the chlorine gas that we use at Post Point, they're all contained, the gas is contained in cylinders. We use that gas for odor control, for post-treatment disinfection, and on a lower level for sludge bulking. So as we get sludge buildup in the system, we will use chlorine to help break that sludge down as needed, but that's kind of one of our lower priorities. When we looked at this project, there was a bunch of different characteristics that we looked at for evaluating. So we looked at capital costs, we looked at the annual O&M, we looked at the life cycle costs for whichever method we were to move forward with. One of the main points that we focused on was the environmental, public, and operator safety of whatever system that we use. We looked at the improvements that would be required for the building to improve, to accommodate whatever source we went through. We also looked at the supply chain reliability as more and more cities have moved away, and we were one of the last cities to move away from chlorine gas. The supply of chlorine gas has diminished, so we're experiencing difficult times of actually obtaining chlorine gas. And then we looked at the overall complexity of the system. As I mentioned, public safety and the environmental risks were one of our number one concerns. Right now at Post Point, if we were to have a gas leak, we estimate that the population that would be affected by that gas leak is anywhere from 8,000 to 10,000 people, depending upon the weather conditions for that day, which way the wind is blowing, et cetera. That equates to up to 4,500 to 5,000 housing units that could be affected by a gas leak. So that was one of our main concerns as we look at risk within our system, and we move these asset management principles forward as we've talked about in other sessions. This is probably one of our higher risks to both staff and to the community. When we reviewed the alternates, so we looked at bulk sodium hypochlorite, which is someone else producing the hypochlorite at their site and just delivering it to us. We looked at on-site sodium hypochlorite generation. We also looked at UV disinfection and ozone, and both of those methods were ruled out because of cost, complexity, really difficult to maintain for our staff. As we looked at the advantages of bulk sodium hypochlorite, there were a few advantages. It's a very proven technology. There's no specialized equipment. It's really just some storage tanks and some modifying our current gas injection system to a liquid injection system. Some of the disadvantage of it were it would take extensive modifications to our building in order to get enough of these tanks in to accommodate bulk delivery. So we would look at large trucks bringing us large amounts of this liquid, probably on a monthly basis. Some of the other concerns that we had was that when you use bulk hypochlorite, it has to be at a much stronger concentration. That creates some issues for us from a regulatory standpoint. If we are storing higher concentration hypochlorite, it falls under the similar regulations of chlorine gas, which led us to look at the on-site generation as well. It's a proven technology. It's non-hazardous and safe for our operators. It's really converting salt water into bleach. With on-site hypochlorite generation, we can make that hypochlorite solution at a much lower level, so it doesn't have to be as potent. When we buy it in bulk, it has to be more potent because it has a shelf life. So after about 30 days, the potency of the hypochlorite diminishes. Whereas with on-site hypochlorite generation, we can do it from a manufacturing perspective more in time as needed. So we produce what we need for the day that we need it. We looked at the alternative cost comparison. So bulk sodium hypochlorite had a significant higher cost over the whole life of the project. We found that just the electrical or the chemical costs were significantly higher. And when we stretched that out over 20 years, we were looking at about a $2 million savings by going with on-site generation. And with that, if you have any questions, I can take those.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike, could you stop sharing your screen? And committee members? Don't be shy. Do we need a motion, or is this for information only?
This is to approve the bid award, so we need a motion to authorize.
Right, okay.
Move approval.
Thank you, Gene. We have a motion before us to approve the bid for construction of the on-site hypochlorite facilities. Any further discussion? This seems better, cheaper, and safer. I think you've brought us a no-brainer. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, I'll also bring that forward tonight with a unanimous recommendation. That concludes the Public Works and Natural Safety Committee, and I'll return the meeting back to you, President Stone.
Thank you, Councilmember Lillquist. We will pause for a moment to wait for clearance from the Deputy Clerk to start the next meeting.